By the 1880s, the majestic sailing vessels of the past were replaced by ships with steam-powered engines. And the invention of these fast-moving vessels affected the journey to America. The same Atlantic crossing that had previously taken 1 to 3 months was greatly reduced to an average of 8 to 14 days, depending on weather, and the passage was made affordable. These were changes that affected not just emigrants, but shipping companies as well. The steamliners en route to America to pick up exports were light in freight. This left room enough for thousands of people to be packed on board during the westbound voyage.
Some people felt that they could not make this trip in this boat. I couldn't understand that, I remember, because I thought that it was going to America and it was wonderful. It's just what I've been looking for all the time for so many years. I knew it was uncomfortable, and I didn't care.
Transporting emigrants was lucrative, but not without restrictions from Washington. And these restrictions were known as passenger laws, specifically developed to make the steamship companies responsible for a pre-screening of every potential passenger while in the port of embarkation.
If you were brought across the ocean by a company and were found to be suffering from a disease, you would be sent back. That works. The companies went out of their way to make sure they didn't bring these people over. In other words, the cost factor was enough to persuade the companies that they didn't want sizable chunks of their immigrant populations being people they would have to transport back home.
By forcing shipping lines to transport back any person seen as unfit, and by fining them a hefty $100 per rejected person, the federal government tried to reduce the number of people that would have to be deported.
The idea is let the Europeans know that the United States is not going to let their riffraff get in. You also begin to find an increasing cooperation between the various police departments, like premature Interpol. That means, for example, that governments are going to start getting very interested in what are these people who are coming? We don't want the jailbirds.
Before departing for America, the shipping companies were required to give medical examinations, have baggage fumigated, and give antiseptic baths to their passengers. For the shipping companies, this was merely a part of the business of transportation. However, for many foreign hopefuls, this could be an unpleasant part of the process of immigration.
Everyone had to go to this station. So I went in the morning, went down, there was a terrific crowd there, all waiting to be examined. I was passed, but my sister and her friend went down to the hall that I was in there. They were putting a whole crowd of them through showers. They must have been cold showers, because I could hear the screaming as I was sitting outside. I was glad I got through early in the morning.
Prior to departure, another responsibility of the shipping companies was a record of the immigrants that were aboard each vessel and the result of their medical exams. This record is known as the passenger ship list or the ship's manifest. The ship manifest is a reliable index of those that came to America during the years Ellis Island was in operation, and the numbered tags seen in the brims of men's hats and pinned to the clothes of women and children in many of the historic photographs directly correspond to the manifest and line number where each individual's information could be found.
The passenger ship manifests are really incredible documents because, number one, they're, for the most part, available today. Number two, they're not even written here. They were written in the old country. And number three, they're written in English. They contain all kinds of incredible information about our ancestors, including things like the street addresses they came from in the old country, the amount of money they had in their pockets.
While the manifests were prepared and the liners were readied, The emigrants were housed in seaport hotels that were owned by the shipping companies. The hotels were similar to dormitories, and it was here that many of the medically checked and deloused individuals spent an average of 4 days.
Then, sometime around 36 hours before the boats departed, you were deloused again. And your belongings, to some degree, were deloused again. And you were brought into what's called the clean side of the hotel. You were quarantined. You couldn't go out again. So after you were quarantined, they would figure out what you had with you.
Once the information was recorded, the emigrants would board the ships. They would then spend the following days as passengers in one of 3 classes. There was a first and second class, and then there was the most inexpensive and uncomfortable way to travel, steerage. This was the area located on the lower deck where the ship's steering mechanism had once been housed, and there over 1,000 people at a time would make the trek across the sea.
There was no separate quarters for sleeping. You stayed with your clothes on through the trip. You couldn't get your clothes off or anything. You just slept where they put you there, you know. So it was a very miserable thing, but they had to endure that in order to get here.
Even though accommodations were at times dreadful, the buoyant spirits of the emigrants could not be broken. They were bound for the New World, and there are countless tales of their experiences. The stories are filled with joyful expectations that were often threatened during fearful adventures. And sometimes it seemed as if their dreams, as well as their lives, would be washed away at sea. During the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, many immigrants had never before been beyond the boundaries of their small villages. And yet there they were, sea voyagers, who were caught in the tangle of ethnicity, bound for America.
You never saw anything so tremendous and so big, you know. It was unbelievable that such a tremendous thing can be on water, you know. And where we were, below, it was all kinds of nationalities, all kinds of people. Some were wearing these fez hats, and Egyptians and Turkish, and we wanted to be friends with them, but there was no communication. All we knew was if somebody patted us on the head or gave us a hug, and they were friends.
Actually, my mother seemed very frightened the whole time. She'd never been out of that little town in her entire life, you know. And here she was getting on board a ship and surrounded with all these strange people that were speaking different languages also. And so it was kind of exciting. I knew that there was excitement all around me.
Depending on the year, the shipping company, and the class of the passenger, travel accommodations varied, and for many they were extremely unpleasant.
The water was so rough, everybody got seasick. There was nobody going to eat for about 2 days.
You had odors of paint, you had odors of food, people got sick, all these odors combined.
We were always in line, everything was a line. We always were queuing up for one thing or another. Conditions were horrible on the ship.
Despite the horrible conditions on ship, the emigrants were often lighthearted. These were people brimming with hope, and that hope would frequently spill out onto the liner's wooden decks.
Up on deck was a great place to go dancing. We had a great time. We had to go up there, we had to dance all the Irish dances, the old-fashioned dances and everything. And we saw the captain, and we were greenhorns from Ireland, we didn't know anything.
I think everybody enjoyed themselves. They were not being forced to take this trip. It was something that they wanted to do, you know, to start life in America.
It was awful. The boat was rocking and big fishes used to jump, almost coming to the boat.
It sounded as if the boat was hitting some rocks, or the great waves would smash. The noise tremendous, and I thought we would flounder at any moment.
I can remember that there was a lot of crying, and people were saying, we're never going to reach America.
For the majority of immigrants, the best part of the journey was its end. And for those entering the port of New York, there was no question they had made a successful voyage once they saw the copper-clad colossus who personified the essence of America.
There was really excitement, and some of the people were crying and everything. They could say, there she is, and I didn't know who was there. And then my mother lifted me up, and I saw the Statue of Liberty.
They were screaming, La libertad, viva la libertad, viva la libertad. So everybody ran up deck, and everybody was around the rails, you know, and pointing at the Statue of Liberty.
People knew through hearsay in Europe that when they approached the harbor, they would see this enormous statue, which also happens to represent American liberty, American freedom.